The stranger at the grave. A broke single father kneels in cemetery mud, clutching wilted daisies worth 2 days' pay, his only way to say thank you to a dead man who saved his son's life. Then a voice like winter cuts through the rain. That's my husband's grave. Who are you? Evelyn Pierce, billionaire widow, ice and designer heels, spots the gold watch on his wrist. Her husband's watch. Her husband's initials. And her eyes turn from grief to fury in one breath. The little boy beside him clutches a teddy bear and trembles. Some debts can't be repaid. Some secrets shouldn't be buried. If you want to see how a chance encounter at a grave changes 3 broken lives forever, stay until the end. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The rain had turned Riverside Memorial Cemetery into a landscape of gray stone and darker regret. Miles Carter knelt in the mud beside grave number 47, Section D, where the grass grew thick and green because money bought better soil even for the dead. His jeans were soaked through at the knees. His jacket, thrift store, 3 years old, held together by hope and a safety pin near the collar, was plastered to his shoulders. In his hands, he held a small bouquet of daisies, already wilting from the rain, their white petals bruised and drooping. 2 days' pay. That's what those flowers cost. 2 days of scrubbing floors at Morrison Tech on the night shift, breathing ammonia and pine sol while everyone else slept. 2 days of making sure the trash cans were empty and the conference room glass was spotless for people who would never see his face. 2 days so he could bring something, anything, to the man who saved Noah's life. "Daddy, I'm cold." Miles looked down. Noah was 6 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that stuck to his forehead in wet curls and eyes that looked too old for a child. He wore a blue windbreaker that was already too small, hand-me-down sneakers with duct tape holding the sole together, and he clutched his teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, nearly bald from years of being loved, against his chest like it was the only warm thing left in the world. "I know, buddy." Miles brushed a hand over Noah's hair, trying to shield him from the worst of the rain, even though it was pointless. "Just a few more minutes, okay? I need to say thank you." Noah nodded solemnly. He understood thank yous. He understood debts. He was 6 years old, and he understood things no child should have to carry. Miles set the daisies down gently against the headstone. The marble was smooth, expensive, engraved with perfect letters that cost more than Miles made in a month. Richard Anthony Pierce, beloved husband, 1978-2023. His work spoke louder than words. Miles had never met Richard Pierce. Not once. Not even a handshake. Not even a glance across a waiting room. But Richard Pierce had reached into Miles's life at the moment it was ending and pulled him back from the edge. $300,000. Anonymous. Impossible. Life-saving. "Thank you," Miles whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain drumming on stone and earth. I don't know if you can hear me, wherever you are, but thank you. Noah's alive because of you. He laughs. He draws pictures. He's got a future because you gave a damn when nobody else did. So, thank you. I'll never forget it. Never." He stayed there a moment longer, head bowed, rain streaming down his face. He wasn't a religious man. Life had beaten that out of him pretty efficiently, but he believed in debts, and this was one he could never repay. The best he could do was show up twice a year, bring flowers, and say the words out loud. He was about to stand when he heard it. Footsteps. Heels on wet pavement. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Miles glanced up. A woman stood 10 feet away, perfectly still beneath a black umbrella that looked like it cost more than his car. She wore a long coat, cashmere, charcoal black, flawless, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that made her face look sharp and angular, all clean lines and cold control. She was maybe 40, though wealth had a way of making age irrelevant. Her eyes were gray-blue, the color of storm clouds, and they were locked on him with the kind of focus that made his stomach clench. "That's my husband's grave." Her voice was quiet, controlled. But there was something underneath it, something that hummed like a live wire buried just beneath the surface. Miles stood up quickly, instinctively putting himself between Noah and this stranger. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to... Who are you? It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Miles opened his mouth, then closed it. What was he supposed to say? I'm the guy your husband saved. I'm the stranger who owes him everything. I'm nobody you'd ever notice, but your husband noticed me when I was broken and bleeding out in a hospital waiting room with a dying kid and no options left. My name's Miles Carter. I wanted to pay my respects. Her eyes narrowed. You knew, Richard? No, not exactly. And that's when she saw it. Her gaze dropped to his wrist, to the watch. The gold watch with the worn leather strap and the scratched face and the engraving on the back that Miles had memorized 1,000 times over. RAP for every second that matters. The woman's face changed, the controlled mask cracked, and what came through was raw and immediate. Her lips parted, her breath caught, and then her expression hardened into something that looked like fury wrapped in ice. Where did you get that? Miles looked down at the watch on his wrist. He'd been wearing it for 2 years, every single day. It was the only thing of value he owned, and he would have sold everything else he had before he let this watch go. It was a gift, he said quietly. A gift. Her voice was flat, disbelieving. From whom? Miles swallowed. From your husband. For a moment she didn't move, didn't speak. The rain fell between them, and the cemetery was silent except for the soft patter of water on stone. Then she stepped forward, and the umbrella tilted just enough that rain began to hit her coat. She didn't seem to notice. That watch, she said slowly, belonged to Richard's grandfather. It was a family heirloom, the only thing he had left from that side of the family. He never took it off, not once in 15 years of marriage. She took another step closer, and Miles could see the grief in her face now, old grief, buried deep, mixed with something sharper and more immediate. So, I'll ask you again, Mr. Carter, where did you get my husband's watch? Miles felt Noah press against his leg, small fingers gripping his jeans. He put a hand on his son's shoulder, steadying him, steadying himself. Your husband sent it to me 2 years ago, Miles said, after he paid for my son's surgery. The woman blinked. Once. Twice. What? Noah needed a heart transplant. Emergency surgery. $300,000. I didn't have it. I didn't have anything. Your husband, he found out somehow. He paid for it. All of it. Anonymously. And when it was done, he sent me this watch with a letter that said, "Stop." The word cracked like a whip. The woman's hand went up, palm out, and her face had gone pale beneath the rain. Stop, that's not possible. It's the truth. No. She shook her head, and for the first time Miles saw something break in her composure. No, I handled every account after Richard died. Every transaction, every payment, She stopped, breathed. $300,000 doesn't just disappear. If he'd done something like that, I would have known. Miles said nothing. He just stood there, rain-soaked and exhausted, with his son pressed against him and the truth sitting between them like a stone. The woman stared at him, then at Noah, then back at the watch. You're lying. I'm not. You stole it. I didn't. Her hand moved toward her coat pocket, toward her phone, and Miles knew what was coming next. Security, police. Questions he couldn't afford to answer in a system that wouldn't believe him anyway. But then Noah moved. The little boy stepped forward, out from behind Miles's legs, and his windbreaker shifted just enough that the collar slipped down, just enough to reveal the scar. It ran from the center of his chest up toward his collarbone, a thick raised line of pink tissue that spoke of scalpels and stitches and hours on an operating table where a team of surgeons had cracked open a child's chest to replace a dying heart. The woman froze. Her eyes locked on that scar, and the color drained from her face completely. "Oh my God," she whispered. Noah looked up at her with those two old eyes and said, very quietly, "It doesn't hurt anymore. Daddy says I'm brave." The woman's hand, halfway to her phone, stopped, trembled, dropped. She took a shaky breath and looked at Miles, and for the first time there was doubt in her expression. Real, undeniable doubt. "Show me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Show me proof." Miles reached into his jacket pocket, careful and slow. He pulled out a plastic sleeve, the kind you use to protect important documents, and inside it were two things, a letter and a photograph. He handed them to her. The woman took them with hands that weren't quite steady. She opened the sleeve, unfolded the letter, and began to read. Miles knew it by heart. He'd read it 100 times in the 2 years since it arrived. "Dear Mr. Carter, you don't know me, and you never will. That's by design. But I know you. I saw you in the hospital waiting room 3 weeks ago, and I saw what fear looks like when it's got no options left. I've spent 15 years building wealth I'll never spend. I've built a life that looks perfect from the outside and feels empty from within. And I realized something sitting in that hospital, watching you hold your son and beg for miracles. I have the ability to answer prayers, and I've been too afraid to use it. So this is me using it. The surgery is paid for, the follow-up care is covered. Your son will live, and you will not go into debt to make it happen. There are no strings, no repayment, no need to find me or thank me. This is not charity. This is someone with too much trying to balance the scales in a world that tips wrong too often. I'm sending you my grandfather's watch because I want you to have something that matters. Not because it's valuable, though it is, but because it's a reminder. Every second counts, especially the ones you spend with the people you love. Don't waste them. A friend." The woman's hands were shaking by the time she finished. She looked up at Miles, and there were tears on her face now, mixing with the rain. "This is Richard's handwriting," she said, and her voice broke on his name. "I know. He never told me. I know." She looked down at the photograph next, a picture of Noah in a hospital bed, small and pale and covered in wires, taken the day after surgery when Miles had finally believed his son might actually survive. "He saved your son," she whispered. "Yes. And he never told me." Miles didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. The woman folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the sleeve, and handed it back to Miles. Then she looked at the grave, at the marble stone with her husband's name carved into it, and something in her expression shifted. "We were married 15 years, she said quietly. 15 years, and I thought I knew him. I thought we told each other everything." She turned back to Miles, and the anger was gone now. In its place was something raw, something that looked like grief mixed with betrayal, mixed with a terrible kind of understanding. "But we didn't, did we? Tell each other everything." Miles shook his head slowly. "I don't think he meant to hurt you." "No." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "No, I don't think he did either. I think he just found it easier to save strangers than to fix what was broken at home." She looked at Noah, still standing there with Mr. Buttons clutched to his chest, and her expression softened. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Noah," the boy said quietly. "That's a strong name." She crouched down, ruining the knees of her expensive coat in the mud, so she was at eye level with him. "I'm Evelyn, and I'm very glad you're okay." Noah studied her for a moment, then said, "Are you sad?" Evelyn's breath hitched. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I am. Do you want to hold Mr. Buttons? He helps when I'm sad." And just like that, the billionaire widow's composure shattered. She took the teddy bear with trembling hands and pressed it against her chest, and the sobs that came out of her were the kind that had been building for years, deep, wrenching, the sound of someone who had been holding everything together for so long that they'd forgotten what it felt like to break. Miles stood there awkwardly, rain streaming down his face, not sure if he should leave or stay or say something. But Noah stepped forward and patted Evelyn's shoulder with one small hand, the way Miles had done for him 1,000 times. "It's okay," Noah said softly. "Crying makes the sad smaller." Evelyn looked up at him through her tears and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're a very wise little boy." "Daddy says so too." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara and rain, and handed Mr. Buttons back to Noah. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she stood up slowly and looked at Miles. Really looked at him, not with suspicion or anger, but with something else, something searching. You come here often? She asked. Twice a year. His birthday and the day Noah's surgery was finished. Evelyn nodded slowly. I come every Sunday. I've never seen you. I come early, before anyone else. Because you didn't want to run into me. Miles hesitated, then nodded. I didn't know what I'd say. How do you thank someone for a gift like that? How do you explain it? You don't, Evelyn said quietly. You just live with it. They stood there in the rain, two strangers bound together by a dead man's secret, and the silence stretched between them until Evelyn finally spoke again. I need to understand this, she said. I need to know how it happened, why it happened, why my husband, her voice caught, why my husband saved your son and never said a word to me. Miles looked at Noah, who was shivering now, his lips tinged faintly blue from the cold. He looked back at Evelyn, at the desperation in her eyes, and he made a decision. I'll tell you everything I know, he said, but not here. Your husband deserves better than us standing in the rain, picking apart his choices. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, then nodded. My car's at the front gate. I'll drive you. You don't have to. I know. She turned toward the path that led out of the cemetery. But I'm going to. Evelyn Pierce's car was exactly what Miles expected. A black Mercedes sedan with leather seats that smelled like money and a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. Noah climbed into the back seat with wide eyes, carefully buckling himself in while Miles sat up front, acutely aware of how much mud he was tracking onto the pristine floor mats. Evelyn didn't seem to notice, or care. She started the engine, turned the heat up to full blast, and pulled out of the cemetery without a word. They drove in silence for 10 minutes, the city passing by in blurs of gray and glass, until Evelyn finally spoke. Where do you live? Miles gave her the address. She didn't react, but he saw her hands tighten slightly on the steering wheel. It was the kind of address that told you everything you needed to know. Low-income housing, cracked sidewalks, chain-link fences, the part of the city where people survived instead of lived. We're going to my house, Evelyn said quietly. I need to show you something. Miles started to protest, but she cut him off. Please, I need to understand. So Miles nodded, and they drove. But the Pierce estate sat on 5 acres of manicured green lawn behind iron gates that opened silently as the car approached. The house itself was massive, 3 stories of stone and glass and architectural angles that looked like they'd been designed to impress rather than welcome. There was a fountain in the circular driveway, actual marble statues, hedges trimmed into geometric perfection. Noah pressed his face against the window and whispered, Is this a castle? Evelyn glanced in the rearview mirror, and for the first time Miles saw the ghost of a smile on her face. Sometimes it feels like one, she said. Cold, empty, built to keep people out. She parked near the front entrance and led them inside. The interior was just as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, chandeliers that looked like they weighed more than Miles's car. Floors so polished you could see your reflection. Art on the walls that Miles recognized from museum trips he'd taken Noah on. The kind of art that came with plaques and ropes to keep people from getting too close. It was beautiful. It was flawless. It felt like a mausoleum. This way, Evelyn said, leading them down a hallway lined with photographs. Miles caught glimpses of Evelyn and Richard at charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, award dinners. In every picture, they stood beside each other, perfectly posed, smiling for the camera. But there was a distance between them, physical space that spoke of something deeper. Evelyn stopped in front of a closed door at the end of the hall. She stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, and Miles could see her gathering herself. This was Richard's study, she said quietly. I haven't opened it since he died. She turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room beyond was smaller than Miles expected, cozy, almost. There was a desk by the window, shelves lined with books that actually looked read, a leather chair worn smooth from use. It smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, and on the desk, stacked neatly, were journals. Dozens of them, leather-bound, different colors, different sizes. Evelyn walked to the desk and ran her fingers over the spines. He wrote in these every night, For years, I used to ask him what he was writing, and he'd just smile and say thoughts, ideas, things I'm working through. She looked at Miles. I never read them. I thought it would be an invasion of privacy. Maybe it would be, Miles said gently. Maybe. Evelyn picked up one of the journals, a dark blue one, worn at the edges. But I think he wanted someone to read them eventually. Otherwise, why keep them? She opened the journal to a page marked with a ribbon and began to read aloud. I saw a man today, in the hospital. I was there for the board meeting, another fundraiser, another ribbon to cut, another speech about the importance of giving back. And in the waiting room, I saw him, 30, maybe younger, exhausted, terrified, holding a little boy who looked too small and too sick and too fragile to be in this world. Evelyn's voice wavered, but she kept reading. I asked the nurse what was wrong. She said the boy needed a heart transplant, emergency surgery. The father didn't have insurance, didn't have savings, didn't have options. I asked what would happen if he couldn't pay. She said they'd stabilize the boy and send him home to wait. And we both knew what that meant. Evelyn stopped, breathed, continued. I've spent 15 years building wealth I'll never spend. I've given to charities, I've funded scholarships, I've cut ribbons and smiled for cameras and told myself I'm making a difference. But this was different. This was immediate. This was one father and one child and one choice I could make right now, in this moment, that would change everything. So I made it. I paid for the surgery. All of it. Anonymously. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want gratitude. I just wanted to know that one time, one single time, I did something that mattered more than a tax write-off or a photo opportunity. Evelyn closed the journal and looked at Miles. He wrote about you for pages, about Noah, about the surgery, about how it made him feel purposeful in a way nothing else had in years. Miles felt his throat tighten. Why didn't he tell you? Evelyn set the journal down carefully. Because telling me would have meant admitting that our marriage was dying, that we'd become strangers living in the same house, that he found it easier to save your son than to save us. She walked to the window and stared out at the perfectly manicured lawn. We spent 3 years trying to have children. 3 years of doctors and treatments and hope that kept getting crushed. And then we just stopped. Stopped trying. Stopped talking about it. Stopped being anything except efficient. She turned back to Miles and her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. He was a good man, but we weren't good together, not anymore. Maybe we never were. Miles didn't know what to say to that, so he said the only thing that felt true. He saved Noah's life. Whatever else happened between you two, whatever was broken or missing, he saved my son. And that matters. Evelyn nodded slowly. It does. She looked at the journals again. There's more. About a foundation he wanted to start, for children like Noah. Emergency medical cases where families couldn't afford treatment. She picked up another journal, this one green. He'd already drafted the bylaws, identified funding sources, written mission statements. She handed it to Miles. Miles opened it and saw page after page of Richard Pierce's careful handwriting, plans and budgets and lists of hospitals and legal frameworks and everything you'd need to turn an idea into something real. He was going to do this, Miles said quietly. Yes, but he died before he could start. Evelyn took the journal back. Heart attack, sudden. He was here, in this study, and he just stopped. Noah, who had been sitting quietly in the leather chair, spoke up. Is that why you're sad? Because he stopped? Evelyn looked at him, and her expression crumpled. Yes, sweetheart. That's why I'm sad. Noah climbed down from the chair and walked over to her. He took her hand, his small fingers wrapping around hers, and said, Daddy says when people stop, it's okay to be sad. But it's also okay to remember the good parts. Evelyn sank down onto her knees and pulled Noah into a hug. Not a polite hug, a real one. The kind that says, I'm breaking and you're holding me together. Miles watched them, this billionaire widow and his 6-year-old son, and felt something shift in his chest. When Evelyn finally pulled back, she wiped her eyes and looked up at Miles. I need to ask you something. Okay. Why did you keep coming to his grave? You never met him. You don't owe him anything beyond gratitude. So why? Miles thought about it. About the daisies. About kneeling in the mud twice a year. About the watch he wore every day like a promise. Because he saw me, Miles said finally. When I was invisible to everyone else, when I was just another broke dad in a waiting room, he saw me. He saw Noah. And he decided we mattered. That's not something you forget. That's not something you let go. Evelyn stood up slowly, still holding Noah's hand. He would have liked you, she said quietly. You think? I know. She looked at the journals, then back at Miles. He wrote that he hoped you'd do something good with the second chance he gave you. That you'd make it count. I'm trying. I can see that. Evelyn took a deep breath. I want to finish what Richard started, the foundation, the medical fund, all of it, but I don't know how. I know money, I know systems, but I don't know what it's like to sit in that waiting room and watch your child die because of a number on a form. She looked at Miles. You do. Miles felt the weight of what she was asking settle onto his shoulders. You want my help? I want your experience, your perspective, your understanding of what families like yours need when everything falls apart. She paused. If you're willing. Miles looked at Noah, who was watching him with those two old eyes. He looked at the journals stacked on the desk. He looked at Evelyn Pierce, billionaire widow, standing in her dead husband's study asking a janitor for help. And he thought about Richard Pierce sitting in a hospital waiting room, watching a stranger break, and deciding to do something about it. Yeah, Miles said. Yeah, I'm willing. Evelyn's breath came out in a rush, like she'd been holding it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I work nights. I've got a kid to take care of. I don't know the first thing about running a foundation. Then we'll figure it out together. Evelyn managed a small smile. Richard left me everything I need except the one thing that matters most. A reason to use it. She looked at the journals again, and Miles saw something change in her expression. Determination, purpose, the kind of look that meant decisions were being made. I spent 2 years avoiding this room, Evelyn said quietly. Avoiding his things. Avoiding the truth about what our marriage became. But maybe that's not what he would have wanted. Maybe he would have wanted me to take what he started and finish it. I think he would have, Miles said. Evelyn nodded. Then that's what we'll do. She looked at Noah. And maybe, along the way, we'll build something that makes sure no other father has to kneel in the mud with wilted flowers, wondering how to say thank you to a dead man. Noah, who had been listening quietly, said, That's a good thing to build. Evelyn laughed. A real laugh this time, raw and surprised. Yes. Yes, it is. They stayed in Richard's study for another hour. Evelyn pulled out more journals, and together she and Miles went through them, piecing together Richard's vision for the foundation. The structure, the mission, the practical details of how to help families in crisis without drowning them in bureaucracy. Noah fell asleep in the leather chair, Mr. Buttons tucked under his chin, while Miles and Evelyn worked. By the time they were ready to leave, the rain had stopped and the sky was beginning to clear. Evelyn drove them home, and when they pulled up in front of Miles's apartment building, cracked concrete, peeling paint, chain-link fence, she didn't flinch. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. We'll set up a proper meeting, go through everything. Okay. Miles started to get out, but Evelyn stopped him. Miles? He turned back. Thank you for coming to the grave today, for bringing flowers, for caring about someone you never met. Miles looked at her, this woman who had started the day as a stranger and ended it as something else, a partner, maybe, or at least the beginning of one. He saved my son, Miles said simply. That's not something you walk away from. Evelyn nodded, and there were tears on her face again, but this time they looked different, lighter, somehow. Miles carried Noah inside, laid him down on the couch, and covered him with the blanket that had been washed so many times it was soft as silk. He sat down beside his son and looked at the watch on his wrist. For every second that matters. We're going to make it count, Miles whispered to the empty apartment. To Noah, to the memory of Richard Pierce. I promise. We're going to make it count. Outside, the rain started again, soft and steady, washing the city clean. The next morning came too early and too bright. Miles woke to Noah's small hand shaking his shoulder and the smell of burned toast drifting from the kitchen. He'd fallen asleep on the couch, still wearing his rain-soaked clothes, and now everything ached. His back, his neck, the place behind his eyes where exhaustion lived permanently. "Daddy, the toaster made smoke again." Miles groaned and sat up, rubbing his face. The watch on his wrist caught the morning light coming through the thin curtains, and suddenly yesterday came flooding back. The cemetery, Evelyn Pierce, the journals, the promise he'd made in a dead man's study to help build something that mattered. "It's okay, buddy. I'll fix it." He stood up, joints popping, and headed to the kitchen where their ancient toaster was indeed smoking faintly, 2 pieces of bread charred black inside it. Miles unplugged it, dumped the bread in the trash, and made a mental note that this was now the 3rd appliance in the apartment that was actively trying to kill them. His phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. He picked it up. "Hello?" "Miles, it's Evelyn Pierce." Her voice was crisp, professional, the kind of tone that said she'd already been awake for hours and had probably accomplished more before 8 a.m. than most people did all day. "I hope I'm not calling too early." Miles glanced at the clock on the microwave. 7:15. "No, it's fine. We're up." "Good. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'd like to move forward quickly. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? Say, 2 o'clock? Miles thought about his schedule. He had to drop Noah at school, pick up a shift at Morrison Tech if they'd let him swap for daytime hours, figure out how to explain to his supervisor why he needed time off in the middle of the week. "I work nights," he said carefully. "I'd need to move some things around." "I understand, but Miles, if we're going to do this, if we're going to build this foundation the way Richard envisioned it, we need to move fast. Time matters in emergency medical cases. Every day we delay is another family sitting in a waiting room with no options." She was right. Miles knew she was right. That didn't make it easier to tell his supervisor he needed personal time when he was already one missed shift away from losing the job entirely. "I'll be there," he said. "Thank you. I'll text you the address." She paused. "And Miles, wear something comfortable. We're going to be working." The call ended before he could ask what that meant. Noah appeared in the doorway, still in his dinosaur pajamas, holding Mr. Buttons. "Was that the sad lady from yesterday?" "Yeah, buddy. She wants us to help her with something important." "Helping is good." "Yeah, it is." Miles knelt down and pulled Noah into a hug, breathing in the smell of his son's shampoo. Cheap, strawberry-scented, perfect. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" Noah giggled. "Daddy, you say that every day." "Because it's true every day." They went through their morning routine, breakfast, getting dressed, the walk to Riverside Elementary where Noah's teacher, Mrs. Chen, always greeted them with a warm smile and never mentioned how many permission slips Miles forgot to sign or how Noah's shoes were getting too small. Miles watched his son disappear into the classroom, backpack almost as big as he was, and felt the familiar tug of gratitude and terror that came with single parenthood. Every day Noah walked through those doors was a day Richard Pierce had given them. Every laugh, every drawing, every moment of just being 6 years old and alive, that was the gift. And now Miles had a chance to pass it forward. He pulled out his phone and called Morrison Tech. "Morrison Technology Services, this is Darren." "Hey, it's Miles Carter. I need to ask about shifting my schedule today. Is there any way I can—" "Carter, we've talked about this. Your night shift. That's the assignment. You can't just call in the morning and expect us to reshuffle the entire rotation." Miles closed his eyes and counted to 3. Darren was the kind of supervisor who treated his tiny bit of power like it was a throne and everyone else was there to bow. "I understand that, but this is important. I wouldn't ask if—" "Let me guess. Family emergency?" The way Darren said it made it clear he didn't believe a word. And why would he? Miles had used that excuse before, when Noah was sick, when the school called, when the babysitter canceled and there was nobody else. "Something like that," Miles said quietly. "Right. Well, here's the thing, Carter. You're already on thin ice. 3 late arrivals this month, 2 early departures. And now you want to skip an entire shift?" "I'm not skipping. I'm asking to swap." "Same difference." Darren's voice took on that particular tone of smug satisfaction that made Miles's jaw clench. You miss tonight's shift, we'll count it as a no-show. 3 no-shows and you're terminated. Company policy. Miles thought about the bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the rent that was due in 5 days. The fact that this job, as terrible as it was, kept Noah fed and kept a roof over their heads. He thought about Evelyn Pierce asking for his help, about Richard's journals full of plans to help families like his. He thought about what mattered. I'll be there tonight, Miles said. Smart choice, Carter. See you at 11. The line went dead. Miles stood there on the sidewalk outside Noah's school, phone in hand, and let himself feel angry for exactly 10 seconds. Then he shoved it down, pocketed his phone, and started walking. He had 6 hours until he needed to meet Evelyn. 6 hours to figure out how to be in 2 places at once and not lose everything in the process. The address Evelyn had texted him led to a building downtown that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought glass and steel were the only materials that mattered. Pierce Industries occupied the top 3 floors, and when Miles walked into the lobby, he felt every eye turn toward him. He was wearing his best clothes, jeans without holes, a button-down shirt he'd ironed that morning, sneakers he'd scrubbed clean, but he still looked exactly like what he was, someone who didn't belong. The receptionist was polite but cool. Name? Miles Carter. I'm here to see Evelyn Pierce. She typed something into her computer and her eyebrows went up slightly. Whatever she saw on that screen made her recalibrate her entire approach. Of course, Mr. Carter. Mrs. Pierce is expecting you. Top floor, east wing. Someone will escort you up. 5 minutes later, Miles was stepping out of an elevator into a space that looked more like an art gallery than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Abstract paintings hung on white walls. The carpet was so thick his footsteps made no sound. Evelyn met him halfway down the hall. She was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Miles made in 3 months, her hair pulled back in that same severe style, but her eyes were different today. Warmer somehow, more present. Miles, thank you for coming. She shook his hand, firm grip, professional, and gestured toward a conference room. We have a lot to cover. The conference room had a table that could seat 20 people, but today it was just the 2 of them, and a third person Miles hadn't expected to see. A woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled into a bun and glasses perched on her nose, surrounded by stacks of folders and a laptop that looked like it was running 6 programs simultaneously. This is Margaret Chen, Evelyn said. She was Richard's chief financial officer and the only person I trust completely to tell me the truth, even when I don't want to hear it. Margaret stood and shook Miles's hand. I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Carter. Miles, please. Miles. She smiled, and it softened her entire face. Evelyn's been up since 4 a.m., going through Richard's journals and pulling together the framework for the foundation. She called me at 5 to tell me we were making this happen, whether I liked it or not. I didn't say it quite like that, Evelyn said dryly. You absolutely did. Margaret gestured to the folders, but she was right to push. What Richard outlined in those journals is not only feasible, it's desperately needed. I've spent the morning running numbers, and we can fund this sustainably if we structure it correctly. Miles sat down slowly, trying to process what he was hearing. Yesterday, he'd been kneeling in a cemetery. Now he was sitting in a conference room with a billionaire and her CFO discussing how to build something real. I don't understand, he said. Why move this fast? Why not take time to plan, to make sure? Because children are dying, Miles. Evelyn's voice was quiet but firm. Right now, today. While we sit here in this comfortable room discussing logistics, Richard understood that. It's why he paid for Noah's surgery immediately instead of forming a committee to study the issue. She opened one of the folders and slid it across the table. Inside were medical bills, dozens of them, all from different families, all marked past due or final notice or sent to collections. These are from the hospital where Noah had his surgery, Evelyn said. I called the billing department this morning and asked for a list of current emergency cases where families couldn't pay. This is what they sent me. Miles looked at the numbers, 50,000, 120,000, 300,000. Each one represented a child, a family, a parent sitting in a waiting room choosing between bankruptcy and grief. How many? He asked quietly. 17 cases currently active. Pediatric emergencies, time-sensitive, families without insurance or with coverage so inadequate it might as well not exist. Evelyn's jaw tightened. 17 children who need help this month alone, and that's just one hospital. Margaret pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop and turned it so Miles could see. Richard allocated $5 million in seed funding for the foundation. If we structure the grants correctly, prioritize the most urgent cases, and work with hospitals to negotiate reduced rates, we can help somewhere between 40 and 60 families in the first year. Miles stared at the numbers. 40 to 60 families. 40 to 60 children who would get to live because someone decided to care. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Evelyn leaned forward. "Honestly, everything you know. How the system failed you, what worked, what didn't, what you needed in that waiting room that nobody offered. You've lived this nightmare, Miles. Most of the people who run charitable foundations have never missed a meal in their lives, let alone watched their child die because of a number on a form." "I'm a janitor," Miles said. "I clean floors and empty trash cans. I don't know anything about running a foundation or managing grants or—" "You know what matters," Margaret interrupted. "And that's rarer than you think." Evelyn nodded. "I can hire lawyers and accountants and administrators. I can't hire someone who understands what we're trying to fix because they lived through it. That's you." Miles looked at the medical bills spread across the table. He thought about Noah's surgery, about the weeks of waiting, about the moment the hospital administrator told him they couldn't operate without payment up front, and he'd felt his entire world collapse into a single thought. "My son is going to die because I'm poor." "Okay," he said. "Tell me what you need." They spent the next 3 hours going through Richard's plans page by page. The foundation would be called Second Chances Medical Fund. Straightforward, honest, impossible to misunderstand. They would work directly with hospitals to identify critical cases. They would cover costs the families couldn't pay, working with billing departments to reduce charges where possible. They would prioritize children and time-sensitive cases. And they would move fast. "No committees," Evelyn said firmly. "No endless application processes." Richard was adamant about that. If a family needs help, we help them. We verify the medical necessity, confirm they can't pay, and we cover it. That's it. "What about fraud?" Miles asked. "What if people lie?" "We'll work with the hospitals to verify cases," Margaret said. "But honestly, Miles, in my experience, the bigger problem isn't fraud. It's families who are too proud or too scared to ask for help. The ones who suffer in silence because they think they don't deserve charity, or they're ashamed they can't provide for their own children." Miles knew that feeling. He'd lived it. The shame of sitting in that hospital knowing that his son's life came down to money he didn't have. The crushing weight of inadequacy that made it hard to breathe. "We need to make it clear this isn't charity," he said quietly. "People hear charity and they think pity. They think handouts. They think they're taking something they didn't earn." "What would you call it?" Evelyn asked. Miles thought about it, about the watch on his wrist, about Richard Pierce sitting in a waiting room watching a stranger break and deciding to care. "A gift," he said finally. "Not because they deserve it or earned it, just because someone saw them and decided they mattered." Evelyn wrote that down. "A gift. I like that." They worked through lunch, sandwiches Margaret ordered from somewhere that delivered on actual plates, and by the time Miles checked his phone, it was past 4 o'clock. He had 7 hours until his shift at Morrison Tech. 7 hours to pick up Noah, feed him dinner, find someone to watch him overnight, and get across town to start pushing a mop around empty offices. "I need to go," Miles said, standing up. "I have to pick up my son from school." Evelyn looked up from the document she was reading. "Already? We haven't even covered the legal structure yet." "I know, but I've got work tonight, and Noah—" "Quit." Miles blinked. "What?" "Quit your job." Evelyn said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You can't build this foundation working night shifts and raising a child alone. It's not sustainable. I can't just quit. I need the income. I have rent and bills and I'll hire you." Evelyn closed the folder in front of her. "As the foundation's director of family services, salary—" She glanced at Margaret. $65,000 to start, Margaret said without hesitation, plus benefits. Health insurance, dental, retirement matching, standard executive package. Miles felt like the floor had disappeared beneath him. 65,000? Is that not enough? Evelyn asked. We can negotiate. No, it's... Miles sat back down because his legs weren't working right. That's more than I make in 2 years. It's also less than you're worth, Margaret said matter-of-factly. We checked the going rate for nonprofit program directors. You'd be underpaid compared to the market. Miles couldn't process this. Yesterday he was cleaning toilets. Today, someone was offering him more money than he'd ever imagined making, to do work that actually mattered, with benefits that meant Noah would have real health insurance instead of the state-subsidized coverage that barely covered checkups. I don't have a degree, he said. I didn't finish college. I don't have any of the qualifications. You have the only qualification that matters, Evelyn said. You understand what we're trying to do because you lived it. Richard wrote about that in his journals. He said the biggest problem with institutional charity is that it's run by people who've never experienced the problems they're trying to solve. They mean well, but they design systems that look good on paper and fail in practice. She pulled out one of the journals and opened it to a marked page. Listen to this. I went to a fundraiser last night for pediatric cancer research. $2,000 a plate. Everyone wore designer suits and congratulated themselves on making a difference. But I kept thinking about the father I saw at the hospital. He was wearing work boots and a jacket, held together with duct tape, and he would have given everything he owned just to hear his son laugh one more time. We weren't in the same room. We weren't even in the same universe. How can I help people I've never actually seen? Evelyn closed the journal. Richard saw you, Miles, and now I'm seeing you. Not as a janitor or a charity case or someone who needs saving, as someone who knows exactly what needs to happen to make this work. Miles looked at the medical bills on the table, at the spreadsheets and budgets and plans, at the watch on his wrist that carried a dead man's promise. I'd be fired anyway if I missed tonight's shift, he said quietly. I'm already on thin ice. Then make the choice easy, Margaret said. Say yes. Start tomorrow. We'll have the paperwork ready by 9 a.m. Miles thought about Noah, about the tiny apartment with the smoking toaster and the landlord who called twice a month about late rent, about working nights and barely seeing his son and being so tired all the time that joy felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. He thought about 40 to 60 families, 40 to 60 children, 40 to 60 chances to pass forward the gift Richard Pierce had given him. Yes, Miles said. Okay, yes. Evelyn smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that reached her eyes. Good. Margaret will get you set up with HR. And Miles, thank you for trusting us, for taking this risk. Thank you for asking me to. Margaret started gathering her folders. I'll get the employment contract drafted tonight. And Miles, do you have someone who can watch Noah during the day? We'll need you in the office fairly regularly at first while we build the operational framework. I'll figure something out. Actually, Evelyn said slowly, I might have a solution. My house has an entire wing that hasn't been used in years. Guest quarters. 3 bedrooms, kitchen, private entrance. It's just sitting empty. She looked at Miles. You and Noah could live there. No rent. It would make logistics easier, and frankly, that house is too big for one person. It should have a child in it. Miles opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're offering us a place to live? In your house? In the guest wing. You'd have your privacy, your own space, and Noah would have a yard to play in instead of... She stopped herself. Instead of a parking lot behind a low-income apartment complex, Miles finished quietly. I wasn't going to say it like that. But it's true. Miles looked at his hands, at the calluses from mopping floors and carrying his son and holding together a life that was always one disaster away from collapse. Why are you doing this? Really? Yesterday you thought I stole your husband's watch. Today you're offering me a job and a place to live. What changed? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Miles had heard it. I read the rest of Richard's journals last night. All of them. 20 years of thoughts and dreams and regrets written in a room I was too afraid to enter. She looked at the folders on the table. He wrote that he spent 15 years building an empire and forgot to build a life. That he had everything money could buy and nothing that money couldn't replace.
And then he met you, a stranger in a hospital waiting room. And for the first time in years, he felt like he'd done something that mattered. She met Miles's eyes. I don't want to spend the rest of my life living in this beautiful, empty house wondering what I could have done differently. Richard left me the resources to make a difference. You're giving me the roadmap to use them. So maybe the real question is, why wouldn't I do this? Miles understood then.
This wasn't charity. This was two broken people trying to honor a dead man's legacy by building something he never got to finish. This was Evelyn Pierce trying to find purpose in the wreckage of her marriage, and Miles trying to repay a debt that could never be fully settled. Okay, he said, we'll move in, but we pay for groceries and utilities. I'm not looking for a handout. Agreed. Evelyn extended her hand. Partners? Miles shook it. Partners. Margaret gathered the last of her files and headed for the door, then paused. You know what Richard would say right now if he could see this? What? Evelyn asked. Finally. Margaret smiled. He'd say, finally, she's listening. After Margaret left, Evelyn and Miles sat in the conference room a while longer, going through the last details. They would announce the foundation publicly in 2 weeks. They would start taking applications immediately. They would hire a small staff, medical coordinator, grant administrator, legal counsel. And Miles would be the bridge between the families who needed help and the systems designed to provide it. There's one more thing, Evelyn said. She pulled out a small box from her briefcase and slid it across the table. Open it. Miles opened the box. Inside was a key. To the guest wing, Evelyn explained, and to the front gate. You can move in whenever you're ready. Miles held the key, and it felt heavier than it should, heavier than brass and cut metal. It felt like possibility, like a door opening to a life he'd never let himself imagine. I need to tell Noah, he said. He'll want to know what's happening. Of course, take the evening. Settle things with your current employer. And Miles? Evelyn stood up. Tomorrow is the beginning of something important. Get some sleep. Miles left Pierce Industries and walked back into the late afternoon sunlight, feeling like he'd stepped through into a different version of his life. Same city, same streets. But everything had shifted slightly, like reality had recalibrated itself while he wasn't paying attention. He picked Noah up from after-school care, and they walked home together. Noah chattering about a project they'd done in art class involving macaroni and entirely too much glue. Miles let him talk, soaking in the sound of his son's voice, the way he pronounced certain words wrong, the breathless excitement over small things. When they got back to the apartment, Miles sat Noah down on the couch and told him everything. About the foundation, about the new job, about Evelyn's offer to let them live in the guest wing of her enormous house. Noah listened with wide eyes, Mr. Buttons clutched against his chest. When Miles finished, the boy was quiet for a long moment. So we're leaving here? Noah asked finally. Yeah, buddy, we are. And I'd have my own room in the castle? Miles laughed despite himself. Yeah, your own room. And you wouldn't have to work at night anymore? No more night shifts. Noah thought about this very seriously. Then he said, would the sad lady still be sad? Trust a 6-year-old to cut straight to the heart of it. I think she'll be less sad, Miles said carefully. I think helping other kids will make her feel better, and I think having us there will make that big house feel less empty. Okay, Noah nodded decisively. We should go then, because being sad alone is worse than being sad with friends. Miles pulled his son into a hug and held on tight. When did you get so smart? You say that every day, Daddy. Because it's true every day. That night, after Noah fell asleep, Miles called Morrison Tech and quit. Darren sputtered and threatened and tried to guilt him into staying, but Miles just said, I found something better, and hung up. Then he stood in the middle of their tiny apartment, the place where he'd raised Noah alone, where they'd survived on ramen and hope, where he'd cried himself to sleep more nights than he could count, and said goodbye to it silently. Tomorrow they would start packing. Tomorrow they would start building something bigger than both of them. But tonight, he just stood there with Richard Pierce's watch on his wrist, feeling the seconds tick by, every single one of them mattering. Moving day came faster than Miles expected. 3 days after accepting Evelyn's offer, he stood in the apartment he'd called home for 4 years, surrounded by cardboard boxes, that revealed just how little they actually owned. Everything he and Noah needed fit into 7 boxes, 2 suitcases, and 3 garbage bags full of clothes. It was pathetic and liberating in equal measure. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully packing his drawings into a box that used to hold cereal. He treated each picture like it was priceless, smoothing out the corners, making sure none of them folded. Miles watched him work and felt something crack open in his chest. Pride mixed with an ache that never fully went away. His son had learned to be careful with things because they'd never had enough to be careless. "You can leave some behind if you want," Miles said gently. "We'll have more space for new drawings." Noah looked up, scandalized.
But these are important, Daddy. They're my memories.
"Okay, buddy. All of them come with us then." A knock at the door interrupted them. Miles opened it to find Evelyn standing in the hallway wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. It was the most casual he'd seen her, and it made her look younger, less like a billionaire widow and more like a person. "I brought help," she said, stepping aside. Behind her stood Margaret and 2 young men in Pierce Industries polo shirts, both looking friendly and strong in the way that made Miles immediately think they'd been hired specifically for this kind of thing. "We're not taking charity," Miles started, but Evelyn held up a hand. "It's not charity, it's logistics. I need you functional and focused on the foundation, not exhausted from hauling furniture down 3 flights of stairs." She looked past him into the apartment. "Besides, it won't take long. You don't have much." She didn't say it meanly, just matter of fact, but Miles still felt the sting of it. She was right, though. They didn't have much. "Noah," Evelyn called, walking into the apartment like she'd been there 100 times. "Are you ready for your new room?" Noah scrambled to his feet, Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm. "Is it really big?" "It's really big, with windows that look out over the garden, and there's a reading nook built into the wall." She knelt down to his level. "I thought maybe you could keep your drawings there. Make it your special space." Noah's eyes went wide. "My own special space?" "All yours." Miles watched them together, this woman who'd lost everything that money couldn't buy, and his son who'd never had anything money could, and felt something shift in the air between them. Evelyn wasn't just helping out of guilt or obligation, she was building something too. Something that had nothing to do with foundations and everything to do with finding purpose in the wreckage. The move took less than 2 hours. The 2 young men, David and Sam, carried everything down to a truck that was far too large for the amount of stuff they had to move. Margaret supervised with the efficiency of someone who'd organized much more complicated logistics, and Evelyn helped Noah pack his books, asking him about each one like his opinion on The Very Hungry Caterpillar mattered as much as a board meeting. By noon, they were pulling through the iron gates of the Pierce estate. Noah had his face pressed against the truck window, watching the fountain and the marble statues and the perfectly trimmed hedges pass by like he was entering a different world, which Miles supposed he was. The guest wing was on the east side of the house, connected by a covered walkway, but far enough away to feel separate. Evelyn unlocked the door and led them inside, and Miles had to stop in the doorway just to process what he was seeing. The space was bigger than their entire apartment had been. There was a living room with actual furniture that matched, a kitchen with appliances that looked like they'd never been used, and down a hallway, 3 bedrooms. The walls were painted warm colors, cream and soft gold, and sunlight poured through windows that overlooked gardens where actual roses grew in organized beds. "This is too much," Miles said quietly. "It's been empty for 6 years," Evelyn replied. "Richard's parents used to visit, before they passed. After that, it just sat here. Use it, please. It should have life in it." Noah had already disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps echoing on hardwood floors. Miles heard a delighted gasp and followed the sound to find his son standing in the middle of a bedroom that was easily 3 times the size of the one he'd had before. The walls were painted pale blue. There was a bed with an actual headboard, and yes, built into the far wall was a reading nook with cushions and a window that looked out over a garden where butterflies danced between flowers. "Daddy, look!" Noah ran to the reading nook and climbed in. Mr. Buttons clutched tight. "I can see everything from here. There's birds and flowers and... Is that a swing?" Miles looked out the window and saw, hanging from an old oak tree, a wooden swing that looked like it had been there for decades. "Richard built that," Evelyn said quietly from the doorway, "years ago, when we still thought we might have children who'd use it." She looked at Noah, who was practically vibrating with excitement. "It's yours now if you want it." "Can I, Daddy? Can I go swing?" Miles looked at Evelyn, who nodded. "Go ahead, buddy. Just stay where I can see you." Noah scrambled out of the reading nook and tore past them, his footsteps thundering down the hall. They heard the front door open and then slam shut, and through the window, Miles watched his son run across the grass like he'd been released from a cage. "He's never had a yard before," Miles said, his voice rough. "Never had space to just run." "Then I'm glad he has it now." They stood there watching Noah climb onto the swing, his legs pumping hard, his face split wide with joy, and Miles felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Real, uncomplicated hope that maybe things could actually get better. "I'll let you settle in," Evelyn said. "Take the rest of the day. Tomorrow we'll start working, but today just be here. Let Noah explore. Let yourself breathe." "Evelyn?" She turned back. Thank you for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but..." "Stop thanking me," she said, but there was no sharpness in it. "You're giving me something too, Miles. Purpose. A reason to use what Richard left behind for something that matters." "So we're even." After she left, Miles unpacked their boxes in a daze. He put Noah's clothes in drawers that didn't stick. He arranged their books on shelves that weren't made from cinder blocks and boards. He set up their toothbrushes in a bathroom that had a bathtub big enough for Noah to actually swim in. And then he sat down in the living room that was theirs now, in a house that felt like a dream, and let himself cry. Not from sadness, not from grief, just from the overwhelming weight of change, of going from surviving to living in the span of a week. Noah came in an hour later, grass-stained and breathless, chattering about the garden and the swing and a rabbit he'd seen near the hedge. Miles pulled him close and held on, breathing in the smell of sunshine and childhood, and thought about how Richard Pierce had set all of this in motion without ever knowing where it would lead. The Foundation's office was a converted conference room on the second floor of Pierce Industries. Margaret had worked some kind of magic over the weekend, transforming empty space into something functional. There were desks, computers, filing cabinets, and a wall covered in whiteboards where they could track cases and funding and outcomes. Miles arrived Monday morning at 8:30, dressed in clothes Evelyn had insisted on buying him. Business casual, she'd called it, which apparently meant khakis and button-down shirts that actually fit. Noah was spending the day with a woman named Mrs. Brennan, who lived in town and had run a daycare for 30 years. Evelyn had arranged it with the same efficiency she brought to everything, and Miles had decided to stop fighting her on logistics and just be grateful. Evelyn was already there, of course, along with Margaret and two new faces. One was a woman in her 30s with dark curly hair and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. The other was a man who looked barely out of college, wearing glasses and the kind of nervous energy that came from wanting desperately to prove himself. "Miles, good morning," Evelyn gestured to the others. "This is Dr. Sarah Reeves, our medical coordinator. She'll work with hospitals to verify cases and assess medical necessity. And this is James Park, our grant administrator. He'll handle the paperwork and fund disbursement." Sarah stood and shook Miles's hand with a grip that was almost aggressive. "I've worked in emergency pediatrics for 12 years. I've watched kids die because of insurance denials and billing departments, and parents who couldn't afford to save them. So when Evelyn called and told me what you were building, I quit my job the same day." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Sarah sat back down. "I'm tired of treating symptoms. I want to fix the disease. And the disease is a system that makes people choose between their child's life and financial ruin." As James was quieter, more reserved. "I worked in nonprofit grant management before this," he said. "I've seen how slow and bureaucratic the process usually is. What you're proposing, immediate response, minimal paperwork, direct assistance, it's revolutionary, if we can actually pull it off." "We'll pull it off," Evelyn said firmly. "We have to." They spent the morning going through the operational framework. Sarah would work directly with hospital administrators and medical staff to identify critical cases. James would process the grants and coordinate with billing departments. Margaret would manage the finances and ensure they weren't overspending. And Miles, "You're the heart of this,"
Evelyn said, looking at him across the table. You talk to the families. You help them navigate the process. You make sure we're not just throwing money at problems, but actually solving them. I'm not a social worker, Miles said. I don't have training in... You have experience, Sarah interrupted. You've been on the other side of this. You know what it feels like to be told your child might die because of money. That's worth more than a dozen certifications. They pulled up the first case file. A girl named Emma Rodriguez, 7 years old, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Treatment plan in place. Family willing. No insurance. Cost of first round of chemotherapy. $48,000. Parents were both working 2 jobs and still couldn't come close to covering it. Miles read through the file and felt like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. This could have been Noah. This was Noah, in a different universe where Richard Pierce hadn't been sitting in that waiting room. We approve it, Miles said quietly. Just like that? James asked. Just like that. Miles looked at Evelyn. Isn't that the whole point? Kids don't have time for committees. Evelyn smiled. Sarah, verify the medical details. James, process the grant. I want the hospital to have confirmation of payment by end of business today. Sarah was already on her phone. James was typing furiously on his laptop. And Miles sat there watching it happen, watching a system designed to help people actually help them in real time, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. They approved 3 more cases that day. A boy who needed emergency surgery for appendicitis that had gone septic. Twin girls who required specialized respiratory care after being born premature. A teenager who'd been hit by a car and needed reconstructive surgery the family's insurance had deemed cosmetic because it wouldn't save his life. Just give him back his face. By the end of the day, they'd committed nearly $200,000. Margaret assured them they were still well within budget. Sarah confirmed all the medical details. James had the paperwork processed and submitted, and Miles had personally called 4 families to tell them their children were going to get the care they needed. The first call was the hardest. He dialed the number for Emma Rodriguez's mother and listened to it ring, his heart pounding like he was about to jump off a cliff. Hello? The voice was tired, strained, holding on to composure by a thread. Mrs. Rodriguez? My name is Miles Carter. I'm calling from Second Chances Medical Fund. We've reviewed your daughter's case, and I wanted to let you know that we're going to cover the cost of her treatment, all of it. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, quietly, I don't understand. Your daughter needs chemotherapy. We're paying for it. You don't need to do anything except focus on being there for her. Why? Her voice cracked. Why would you do this? We're nobody. We didn't apply for... You don't need to apply. And you're not nobody. You're a mother trying to save her daughter's life, and someone decided that mattered. Miles paused, remembering his own moment in a hospital waiting room. My son needed emergency surgery 2 years ago. I couldn't afford it. A stranger paid for it anyway, and it saved his life. This is me passing that forward. Mrs. Rodriguez broke down completely. Miles could hear her sobbing, could hear her trying to say thank you between gasps, and he just let her cry because he understood. Sometimes thank you isn't big enough for what you're feeling. When she finally composed herself enough to speak, she said, I don't know how to repay this. You don't, Miles said gently. You just love your daughter and help her fight. That's enough. He made 3 more calls just like it. 3 more parents who'd been living in impossible situations, watching their children suffer because the math didn't work out. 3 more people who broke down when he told them help was coming. 3 more families who would get to sleep tonight without that particular nightmare eating them alive. By the time Miles left the office, it was past 7. He picked up Noah from Mrs. Brennan's house, where his son had apparently built an entire city out of wooden blocks and eaten 3 cookies, and drove them back to the guest wing that still didn't quite feel real. Noah chattered about his day over dinner, spaghetti that Miles actually cooked on a stove that heated evenly, and then headed off to take a bath in the enormous tub. Miles cleaned up the kitchen, put on a pot of coffee, and stepped outside into the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The swing hung motionless under the oak tree. Everything was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the distant hum of the city beyond the estate walls. Long day? Miles turned to find Evelyn walking toward him from the main house.
She changed into jeans and a cardigan, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked less like a CEO and more like someone who'd just finished a long day and wanted to talk to another human being. "Good day," Miles said. "Hard, but good." "I listened to the recording of your call with Mrs. Rodriguez." Evelyn joined him on the patio, leaning against the railing. "I hope you don't mind. All our calls are recorded for quality assurance." "I don't mind." "You were perfect, compassionate but direct. You didn't make her feel like she was being pitied." Evelyn looked out over the garden. "That's the difference between charity and dignity. You gave her dignity." "I just told her the truth." "Exactly." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I tried to call her first, before I asked you to do it. I had the phone in my hand and I couldn't make myself dial. Because what if I said the wrong thing? What if I sounded condescending or distant or like I was doing her a favor instead of just helping? So you handed it to me. So I handed it to someone who knew exactly what to say because he'd lived it." She turned to look at him. "Richard was right about you. In his journal, he wrote that you had the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just keeps moving forward even when everything's falling apart." Miles felt his throat tighten. "I didn't have a choice. When you've got a kid depending on you, you don't get to fall apart. Maybe. But you also didn't let it make you bitter. You could have. You had every right to be angry at a world that values money over life. But instead you're here, helping other families, trying to fix a broken system one case at a time." She smiled softly. "That's not just strength, Miles. That's grace." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood there watching the last of the sunlight fade, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones. "Emma Rodriguez starts chemotherapy on Wednesday," Evelyn said after a while. "Sarah confirmed it this afternoon." "That's fast. That's the point. Richard wrote that every day matters when you're fighting for a child's life. Every single day." She looked at the watch on Miles's wrist. "For every second that matters." Miles touched the watch, feeling the worn leather strap, the weight of it. "I think about him sometimes, about what he'd think of all this. I think he'd be proud. Not of me, I'm just writing checks, but of you, of what you're building with this." Evelyn pushed off the railing. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow we have 6 more cases to review." 6? Word is spreading already. Sarah says hospitals are starting to call us instead of waiting for us to reach out. Evelyn paused at the edge of the patio. "We're going to need to hire more staff soon. This is growing faster than I expected." "That's good though, right?" "It's very good. It means people are desperate for exactly what we're offering." She looked back at him. "Get some sleep, Miles. You earned it." After she left, Miles stayed outside a while longer. He thought about Emma Rodriguez and the 3 other families they'd helped today. He thought about the 17 cases still pending. He thought about all the families they hadn't reached yet, the ones still sitting in waiting rooms making impossible choices. And he thought about Richard Pierce sitting in this same garden maybe, writing in his journals about wanting to do something that mattered. The foundation had been open for exactly 1 day, and they'd already changed 4 lives. By the end of the week, that number would climb. By the end of the month, it would climb higher. Miles walked back inside to find Noah already asleep, sprawled across his new bed with Mr. Gigshimter, buttons tucked under one arm and a drawing of the garden clutched in his other hand. Miles carefully pried the drawing loose, set it on the nightstand, and pulled the blanket up over his son's shoulders. "We're doing it, buddy," he whispered. "We're making it count." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork, and families whose faces Miles would never forget. They helped 23 children in those first weeks. 23 kids who got to live because someone decided the math shouldn't matter more than the life. Sarah worked 18-hour days coordinating with hospitals across the state. James processed grants so fast, Margaret had to keep reminding him to double-check his work. And Evelyn threw herself into the foundation like it was the only thing keeping her afloat. Miles noticed it on a Thursday afternoon when he walked into the office to find her standing in front of the whiteboard where they tracked every case. She'd been there since 6 that morning. She hadn't eaten lunch, and she was staring at the names written there like they were a prayer she couldn't quite finish. "You need to rest," Miles said quietly. Evelyn didn't turn around.
A boy named Marcus Thompson was admitted to County General this morning, 6 years old, hit by a drunk driver, multiple internal injuries. The surgery alone is $140,000. His mother is a single parent. She works at a grocery store. She makes $22,000 a year. We'll help him. I know, Sarah's already verifying the details. James is drafting the grant. Evelyn finally turned to look at him, and her eyes were red-rimmed. But what about the next one, Miles? And the one after that? We're helping dozens, but there are thousands, tens of thousands, and we can't save them all. Miles walked over to stand beside her. He looked at the whiteboard, at the names written there in different colored markers.
Emma Rodriguez, complete. The twins, Julia and Sofia Mendez, complete. Marcus Thompson, pending. 7 others in various stages of approval. Richard wrote something in one of his journals, Miles said quietly. I read it the other night when I couldn't sleep. He said, I can't fix the ocean by carrying water in a bucket, but I can save the person drowning in front of me. And maybe that's enough. Maybe it has to be. Evelyn closed her eyes. He was better at this than I am, better at accepting that we can't solve everything. He also had the luxury of distance. He wrote those words in a study while drinking expensive scotch. You and me, we're standing in the water, pulling people out one at a time. It's messier, it's harder, but it's real. She looked at him, and something in her expression cracked. How do you do it? How do you stay hopeful when you know how many we're not reaching? Because of him. Miles pointed at Noah's latest drawing, which he'd taped to the wall next to the whiteboard. It showed the garden, the swing, and 3 stick figures labeled Daddy, Miss Evelyn, and me. Every day I get with my son is a day Richard Pierce gave me. So I take that gift and I pass it forward to Marcus Thompson and Emma Rodriguez and every other kid we can reach. And when I can't reach them all, I remember that reaching some is better than reaching none. Evelyn wiped her eyes. You're better at this than you think, Miles Carter. So are you, Evelyn Pierce. They stood there together, looking at the names of children they'd saved and children they were fighting to save, and Miles felt the weight of it, the impossible scope of the problem balanced against the very real impact of the solution they were building. Marcus Thompson gets approved, Evelyn said finally. Tonight. I don't care if James has to work late. He will. Good. She picked up a marker and wrote approved next to Marcus's name. 24 families. That's what we've helped so far. Richard would have liked that number. He would have liked what we're building more. Evelyn capped the marker and set it down. I'm glad you're here, Miles. I couldn't do this without you. Yeah, you could. You'd just be doing it differently. No. She shook her head. I'd be writing checks from a distance and telling myself I was making a difference. You're making me see the faces, remember the names, stay connected to why it matters. She managed a tired smile. So thank you for keeping me honest. Miles thought about saying you're welcome, but it didn't feel right. Instead, he said, we keep each other honest. That's what partners do. And for the first time since Richard Pierce died, Evelyn looked like she believed she wasn't carrying the weight alone. The Foundation's public launch came on a crisp October morning exactly 6 weeks after that first encounter at Richard's grave. The press conference was held at County General Hospital, the same place where Noah had received his transplant, where Richard Pierce had first seen Miles breaking apart in a waiting room. Evelyn had chosen the location deliberately. She wanted people to understand this wasn't about corporate image or tax benefits. This was about the gap between life and death that money created and about closing it one family at a time. Miles stood backstage in a suit that still felt like a costume, watching through a gap in the curtain as reporters set up cameras and hospital staff filled the seats. His hands were shaking. He'd agreed to speak today, to tell his story, but now that the moment was here, his throat felt like it was closing up. You don't have to do this. Evelyn appeared beside him, also dressed formally, her hair pulled back in that severe style that made her look untouchable. But Miles knew better now. He'd seen her cry over case files. He'd watched her stay up until 3 a.m. making sure a grant processed in time for a surgery scheduled at dawn. The armor was just protective coloring. Yeah, I do, Miles said. These families need to know someone understands what they're going through, not just theoretically, actually understands. Still, If it's too much, it's not. Miles took a breath and looked at her. I've been invisible my whole life, Evelyn. The guy who cleans your office floors, the dad in the waiting room everyone walks past. Richard saw me when nobody else did. So if standing up there and being visible helps one more person get seen, then it's worth it. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. But if you need to stop, you stop. No judgment. Margaret appeared, clipboard in hand, looking every bit the efficient executive assistant despite the fact that she was now the foundation's acting COO. 5 minutes. The hospital administrator is doing opening remarks, then you, Evelyn, then Miles. Keep it under 10 minutes total. The families are scheduled to speak after, and that's what people really want to hear. Families? Miles asked. 3 of them agreed to share their stories, Emma Rodriguez's mother, Marcus Thompson's mother, and the Mendez parents. Margaret consulted her clipboard. They insisted, said people needed to know what you'd done for them. Miles felt his chest tighten. He'd spoken to these families multiple times over the past weeks, helping them navigate treatment plans and insurance appeals and the 1,000 small crises that came with having a seriously ill child. But he'd never expected them to stand up publicly and talk about it. They don't owe us that, Miles said quietly. They know, Margaret replied. But they want to do it anyway. Mrs. Rodriguez said, and I quote, "People need to know there are still good people in the world who give a damn." The hospital administrator, a thin man named Dr. Patterson, who'd been skeptical of the foundation until he'd seen it work, walked out onto the small stage. The murmur of conversation died down. Miles watched through the curtain as Dr. Patterson adjusted the microphone and began speaking. 6 weeks ago, a woman walked into my office and told me she wanted to help families who couldn't afford emergency medical care for their children. I've been in hospital administration for 20 years, and I've heard a lot of promises from people with money who want to feel good about themselves. But Evelyn Pierce was different. She didn't want publicity or plaques or buildings named after her husband. She wanted to save kids. And in 6 weeks, her foundation has helped 31 families. 31 children who are alive today because someone decided they mattered more than a balance sheet. The room erupted in applause. Miles saw reporters scribbling notes, cameras panning across the audience, capturing everything. Dr. Patterson continued. What makes Second Chance's medical fund unique isn't just the money, though that's significant. It's the speed, the dignity, the recognition that when a child is dying, parents don't have time for bureaucracy or means testing or endless forms. They need help now. And this foundation delivers that help with a level of compassion and efficiency I've never seen in 30 years of medicine. More applause. Evelyn stood beside Miles, her face carefully neutral, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. You okay? He asked quietly. I hate public speaking. You run board meetings. That's different. Board meetings are about control and strategy. This is about, she gestured vaguely at the stage, feelings, being vulnerable in front of strangers. Welcome to my world, Miles said with a slight smile. She shot him a look that was half annoyance, half gratitude. If I freeze up there, you're covering for me. Deal, Dr. Patterson was wrapping up. And now, I'd like to introduce the woman who made this possible, Evelyn Pierce. Evelyn took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked out onto the stage like she was walking into battle. The applause was warm but polite. These people didn't know her yet, didn't understand what she'd built. Miles watched as she took her position behind the microphone, her hands gripping the sides of the podium like it was the only thing holding her upright. Thank you, Dr. Patterson, and thank you all for being here today. Her voice was steady, professional, giving nothing away. 6 weeks ago, I discovered that my late husband, Richard Pierce, had been secretly helping families pay for emergency medical care. He did this without telling anyone, including me. And when I found out, my first reaction was anger. How dare he keep secrets? How dare he make decisions like that without consulting me? She paused, and Miles could see her gathering herself. But then I met one of those families, a father and his son. And I understood why Richard did what he did. Because when you're faced with a child who might die because of money, every justification for why the system works the way it does becomes obscene. Every argument about fiscal responsibility or personal accountability or market forces becomes an insult to basic human decency. The room had gone very quiet. Even the reporters had stopped writing. My husband left me a great deal of wealth and no instructions on what to do with it, but he left me something more valuable, a roadmap for how to use that wealth in a way that matters. Second Chance's medical fund exists because Richard Pierce saw a stranger's pain and decided to do something about it. We exist because I realized that honoring his memory means finishing what he started. Evelyn looked directly at the cameras. If you're watching this and you have a child who needs medical care you can't afford, we want to help. Not next month. Not after you've exhausted every other option. Now. Today. Because your child's life shouldn't depend on whether you can afford it. She stepped back from the microphone, and the applause that followed was different this time. Deeper, more genuine, the sound of people recognizing something true. Dr. Patterson returned to introduce Miles, and suddenly his legs didn't want to work. Miles Carter, the Foundation's Director of Family Services, who has lived the experience that drives this work. Miles forced himself to walk out onto the stage. The lights were too bright. The room was too big. Every face turned toward him felt like a judgment waiting to happen. He reached the microphone and looked out at the sea of strangers, and his mind went completely blank. Then he saw Noah, sitting in the front row between Margaret and Sarah, wearing the button-down shirt Miles had bought him specifically for today. His son gave him a thumbs up and a gap-toothed grin, and suddenly Miles remembered why he was doing this. 2 years ago, I was standing in this hospital with my son, who needed a heart transplant, Miles began, his voice rougher than Evelyn's, less polished, but real. The surgery cost $300,000. I had $2,000 in my bank account, a job that paid $12 an hour, and no idea how I was going to save my child's life. He saw people lean forward, saw reporters start writing again. I've never felt more powerless than I did in that moment. I would have done anything, sold everything I owned, worked 3 jobs, stolen if I had to. But none of that mattered because time was running out, and money doesn't care about how hard you're willing to work or how much you love your kid. Money just is. Miles glanced at Noah, who was listening with those 2 old eyes that understood more than any 6-year-old should. Richard Pierce paid for my son's surgery anonymously. I never met him, never thanked him, never got to tell him that because of what he did, my son got to grow up, got to draw pictures and ride swings and laugh at stupid jokes, got to just be a kid. His voice cracked, and he didn't try to hide it. I can't repay that debt, but I can pass it forward. That's what Second Chance's medical fund is, a way of passing forward the gift that Richard Pierce gave me. Because there are 31 families who aren't sitting in waiting rooms wondering if they should say goodbye to their children. 31 kids who get to grow up because someone decided they mattered. Miles looked at the cameras. If you're a parent facing an impossible choice, call us. If you know someone who is, tell them about us. We're not going to solve every problem or save every child, but we're going to save the ones we can reach, and that has to be enough. He stepped back from the microphone, and the applause hit him like a wave. But Miles wasn't listening to it. He was looking at Noah, who had tears running down his face but was smiling anyway, and at Evelyn, who was standing in the wings with her hand pressed against her mouth, and at the families in the audience who understood exactly what he just said because they'd lived it too. Dr. Patterson introduced the families who'd agreed to speak. Maria Rodriguez came up first, a small woman with tired eyes and hands that shook as she gripped the microphone. My daughter Emma has leukemia, she said simply. She's 7 years old. It's wrong. When they told us what treatment would cost, I thought we were going to lose her. Not because the medicine doesn't exist. Not because doctors couldn't help her, but because I couldn't afford it. Her voice broke, but she kept going. I work 2 jobs. My husband works construction. We do everything right. We pay our bills. We don't waste money. But when your child needs $48,000 for 1 round of chemotherapy, doing everything right doesn't matter. You're still broke. You're still helpless. You're still watching your baby suffer. She looked directly at Miles and Evelyn. These people saved my daughter's life. They called me and said, "We're going to help you." And then they did. No forms. No waiting. No questions about whether we deserved it. They just helped. And because they did, Emma is in remission now. She's going back to school next month. She gets to be a kid again. Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. I will never be able to repay what they've done for us, but I can stand here and tell you that there are still people who care. People who see families like mine and decide we're worth saving. That matters. That matters so much. Two more families spoke after Maria, Marcus Thompson's mother, whose son had been hit by a drunk driver. The Mendez parents, whose premature twins had needed months of specialized care. Each story was different in the details, but the same in the shape of it. Families who'd been drowning until someone threw them a lifeline. By the time the press conference ended, Miles's face hurt from holding back tears and his hands ached from gripping the chair. He watched the families file out, watched reporters swarm Evelyn with questions, watched Sarah and Margaret field inquiries from hospital staff who wanted to know how to refer cases. Noah appeared beside him, tugging on his sleeve. "Daddy, you were really brave up there." Miles picked him up, even though he was getting too big for it, held him close, and breathed him in. "I was scared, buddy. That's what makes it brave, being scared and doing it anyway." Noah pulled back to look at him seriously. "Mrs. Brennan told me that." "Mrs. Brennan is a very smart lady." "Are you sad?" Miles thought about it, about standing on that stage, about hearing those families tell their stories, about the weight of knowing they'd helped 31 kids, but there were thousands more they hadn't reached. "No," he said finally. "I'm not sad. I'm grateful and tired, but not sad." "Good. Because Miss Evelyn says we're going to celebrate tonight. She's making dinner." "Evelyn is cooking?" "She said she wants to try. I'm supposed to help." Noah looked delighted by this prospect. "Can we, Daddy? Can we help her?" Miles looked across the room to where Evelyn was still fielding questions from reporters, looking exhausted but determined, and he felt something warm settle in his chest. "Yeah, buddy, we can help her." That evening, Miles and Noah made their way from the guest wing to the main house. It was the first time Miles had been invited into Evelyn's actual living space, and he felt oddly nervous about it. The guest wing was different, neutral territory, a space that had been empty for years. But the main house was where Evelyn actually lived, where Richard had lived, where the marriage that had slowly fallen apart had played out behind closed doors. Evelyn met them at the door wearing jeans and an old sweater with flour on it. Her hair was down and slightly messy, and she looked more human than Miles had ever seen her. "Fair warning," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "I haven't cooked anything more complicated than toast in about 5 years. This might be a disaster." The kitchen was massive, all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, but it felt strangely unused, like a showroom, rather than a place where people actually prepared food. On the counter sat ingredients for what looked like it was supposed to become spaghetti and meatballs, ground beef, pasta, jarred sauce, and a variety of spices that suggested Evelyn had just bought one of everything and hoped for the best. "I thought we'd start simple," she said, looking at the ingredients like they might attack her. "But now I'm not sure I remember how to make meatballs." "I can help," Miles offered. "I've made approximately 10,000 batches of spaghetti and meatballs. It's what happens when you're raising a kid on a tight budget. Please, save me from my own ambition." They fell into an easy rhythm, Miles showing Evelyn how to mix the meat with breadcrumbs and eggs, Noah carefully measuring out spices with the intense concentration he brought to everything, Evelyn following instructions and asking questions that suggested she really had forgotten how to do basic cooking. "Richard used to cook," she said at one point, rolling a meatball between her palms. "Early in our marriage, he'd make these elaborate meals on weekends, but after a while we just started ordering in or going to restaurants. It was easier, more efficient." "More efficient than enjoying a meal together?" Miles asked carefully. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "We were really good at efficiency, really bad at actually being together." Noah, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, piped up. "Daddy and me eat together every night, even when it's just cereal." "That sounds nice," Evelyn said softly. "It is. Daddy says meals are for talking about our day, the good parts and the hard parts." Evelyn looked at Miles. "You're a better parent than I probably would have been. You don't know that." "I do, though. I spent 15 years building a perfect life that felt empty. I don't think I would have had the patience for messy. For real." She placed the meatball on the baking sheet. "But watching you with Noah, seeing how you two are together, it makes me wish I'd tried harder.
that Richard and I had tried harder. Miles didn't know what to say to that, so he just kept working, showing her how to brown the meatballs in a pan before finishing them in the oven, how to cook the pasta so it wasn't mush, how to make jarred sauce taste less like it came from a jar. They ate at the kitchen table instead of the formal dining room, and it felt significant somehow, choosing the space that was meant for everyday life instead of the one designed to impress. Noah chattered through the entire meal about school and the garden and a butterfly he'd seen that morning. Evelyn listened like every word mattered, asking questions, laughing at Noah's jokes, looking more relaxed than Miles had seen her since this whole thing started. After dinner, Noah fell asleep on the couch in the living room, full of pasta and worn out from the day. Miles carried him back to the guest wing and tucked him in, then returned to find Evelyn washing dishes by hand instead of using the dishwasher. "You don't have to do that," Miles said. "I want to. It's soothing, gives me something to do with my hands." She glanced at him. "Did today go how you expected?" "I didn't know what to expect. I've never done a press conference before." "You were good, natural. People believed you because you meant it." She handed him a dish to dry. "The phone's been ringing nonstop since it aired. Sarah says we've gotten 47 new referrals just this afternoon." 47? Hospitals calling, social workers, even some families directly. Evelyn set down the plate she was washing and turned to face him. "We're going to need to expand, hire more staff, maybe open satellite offices in other cities. This is bigger than I thought it would be." Miles dried the dish slowly, thinking, "That's good, right? More reach means more kids we can help." "It's very good. It's also terrifying. What if we can't keep up? What if we make mistakes? What if we help someone we shouldn't or miss someone we should have helped? Then we learn from it and do better next time. That's all anyone can do." Evelyn leaned against the counter, looking exhausted. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple, but it's also not complicated. We do our best. We help who we can. We accept that it won't be perfect." Miles set down the dish towel. Richard spent 15 years trying to build something perfect, and it left him sitting in a hospital waiting room realizing he'd rather save a stranger's kid than go home to his perfect empty house. Maybe the lesson isn't to be perfect. Maybe it's just to be present. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just a guy who's made every mistake possible and somehow still ended up with a good kid and a second chance I don't deserve." "You deserve it, Miles. You deserve all of it." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and when Miles headed back to the guest wing, he paused at the door. "Evelyn?" "Yeah?" "Thank you. For dinner. For today. For all of this." She smiled, and it reached her eyes this time. "You're welcome. And Miles, thank you for reminding me what this is supposed to feel like." "What's that?" "Having a family, even if it's not the traditional kind." Miles thought about that as he walked back through the covered walkway to the guest wing, about how family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was a billionaire widow and a janitor and a 6-year-old boy brought together by a dead man's secret kindness. Sometimes it was broken people trying to honor someone's memory by helping strangers. Sometimes it was just showing up and being present and choosing to care even when it hurt. He checked on Noah one more time before heading to bed. His son was sprawled across the mattress, one arm flung over Mr. Buttons, completely at peace. Miles stood in the doorway watching him breathe, feeling that familiar mixture of gratitude and terror that came with loving someone more than your own life. "We're doing okay, buddy," he whispered. "We're going to be okay." The foundation kept growing. By the end of the second month, they'd helped 63 families. By the third month, over 100. Sarah hired 2 additional medical coordinators. James brought on an assistant to handle the increasing paperwork. Margaret expanded the budget twice to accommodate the demand. And Miles spent his days talking to families who were living the nightmare he'd survived, offering them the same lifeline Richard Pierce had offered him. But there was one call that changed everything. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in late November. Miles was reviewing a case file when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. "Second Chances Medical Fund. This is Miles." "Mr. Carter?" The voice was hesitant, young, barely holding together. "My name is Amanda Peterson. I got your number from a social worker at County General. She said you help families who can't afford medical care." "That's right. Tell me what's happening." "It's my daughter, Sophie.
She's 4 years old and she has a congenital heart defect. She needs surgery to repair it, but our insurance denied it. They're calling it a pre-existing condition and saying it's elective because she's stable right now. But the cardiologist says if we don't fix it soon, she'll start experiencing heart failure within the next year. Miles felt his chest tighten. Noah's condition had been different, but the terror in this woman's voice was identical to what he'd felt sitting in that waiting room. How much is the surgery? $220,000. We've applied for charity care. We've tried to negotiate with the hospital. We've maxed out credit cards and borrowed from family, and we're still $190,000 short. I don't know what else to do. The social worker said you might be able to help, but I don't want charity. I want to pay it back. I'll work my whole life to pay it back if I have to. Mrs. Peterson, Amanda, please. Amanda, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You don't pay it back. That's not how this works. We help you because we can and because your daughter deserves to grow up healthy. That's it. No strings, no repayment plan, no debt. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, why? Miles thought about how to answer that. About Richard Pierce and cemetery mud and watches engraved with promises. About Evelyn learning to cook spaghetti and Noah offering his teddy bear to a stranger. About 31 families that had become 63 that had become over 100. Because someone helped me when I needed it, he said finally, and this is how I say thank you. Amanda Peterson broke down completely, and Miles let her cry while he pulled up her case file and started making notes. By the time the call ended 20 minutes later, he'd gotten all the information Sarah would need to verify the medical details, and James would need to process the grant. The surgery was approved within 48 hours. Sophie Peterson had her heart repaired the following week. And Amanda Peterson called Miles afterward to tell him that her daughter was recovering beautifully, and that she'd spent the last hour just watching her sleep and feeling like the world made sense again. I want to do something, Amanda said, to help other families like you helped us. I don't have money, but I have time. I could volunteer, answer phones, something. Miles smiled. Let me talk to our director. We're always looking for people who understand what this feels like. After he hung up, he went to find Evelyn. She was in her office reviewing budgets with Margaret, but she looked up when Miles appeared in the doorway. We just approved the Peterson case, he said. 4-year-old girl, heart surgery, $220,000. That's good news. It is. But here's the better news. The mother wants to volunteer. She wants to help other families because we helped her. Evelyn set down her pen. That's the 3rd family this month who's offered. 4th, Margaret corrected. Marcus Thompson's father called yesterday asking if we needed help with anything. Miles leaned against the doorframe. What if that's the real success here? Not just the kids we save, but the families who turn around and want to pass it forward, building a community instead of just writing checks. Evelyn exchanged a look with Margaret, and something passed between them that Miles couldn't quite read. What? He asked. We've been talking about that, Evelyn said. About how to scale this beyond just our foundation. What if we created a network, trained other organizations to operate the same way we do, shared our model? You mean franchise second chances? Not franchise, more like open source. Give away everything we've learned so other people can replicate it in their communities. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window. Richard wanted to create a foundation, but what we're building feels bigger than that. It feels like a movement. Miles thought about Amanda Peterson wanting to volunteer, about Maria Rodriguez speaking at the press conference, about families who'd been saved wanting to turn around and save others. Then we make it one, he said quietly. We teach them how to do what we do. We share the failures and the successes. We build something that outlives all of us. Margaret pulled up a document on her laptop. I've been working on a preliminary framework. Open source model, training programs, shared resources. If we do this right, we could have affiliated Second Chances chapters in 20 cities within a year. That's ambitious, Miles said. So is everything else we've done, Evelyn replied. Ambitious seems to be working for us. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning, sketching out what a network might look like, how they'd maintain quality while allowing flexibility, how they'd fund training and support without creating dependency. And Miles thought about Richard Pierce sitting in this same building, writing in journals about wanting to make a difference, never knowing that 2 years after his death, his secret kindness would have grown into something that could change thousands of lives. That night, Miles sat in the garden with Noah, watching the sun set behind the trees. His son was drawing in a sketchbook Evelyn had given him, page after page of the foundation office, of families they'd helped, of a world where people took care of each other. "Daddy, do you think Mr. Pierce is happy?" Noah asked without looking up from his drawing. Miles thought about that. About a man who'd died before finishing what he started. About journals full of regrets and hopes. About a watch that measured seconds that mattered. "Yeah, buddy, I think he's happy. I think he's proud of what we're building in his name." "Good," Noah kept drawing, "because he saved me, and now we're saving other kids. That's a good trade." Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds. "Yeah," Miles said softly, touching the watch on his wrist. "That's a very good trade." 1 year after that first encounter in the cemetery, Miles stood in the foundation office watching snow fall past the windows and thought about how much could change in 12 months. The whiteboard that had once tracked 31 cases now couldn't hold all the names. They'd moved to a digital system 3 months ago just to keep up with the volume. 247 families. 247 children who got to live because someone decided the math didn't matter more than the life. Sarah walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "You're here early." "Couldn't sleep. Big day." "Nervous?" Miles considered the question. Today they were launching the Second Chances Network, the open source model they'd spent 6 months developing. 12 organizations across 8 states had signed on to replicate their approach. By this time next year, they estimated they could reach over 1,000 families, maybe more. "Not nervous," Miles said finally. "Just aware of how much could go wrong, or how much could go right." Sarah took a sip of her coffee. "I talked to the Seattle chapter yesterday. They've already identified 15 cases they're ready to approve the minute their funding comes through. Portland has 11. Chicago has 23. That's a lot of pressure to deliver. That's a lot of kids who get to live." Sarah set down her coffee and looked at him seriously. "Miles, do you remember what you told me the first day we met? You said you wanted to fix the disease, not just treat symptoms. This is how we do that. We make it impossible for any community to ignore the problem because the solution is right there, proven, ready to implement." Miles knew she was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were 2 different things. He'd spent the last year working directly with families, seeing their faces, hearing their stories, watching children recover because of help that came fast enough to matter. Scaling up meant losing some of that direct connection. It meant trusting other people to care as much as he did. "What if they don't do it right?" Miles asked quietly. "What if they turn it into just another bureaucracy, forms and committees, and then we pull their certification and find someone who will do it right? That's why we built in the oversight mechanisms. That's why we're requiring quarterly audits and family satisfaction surveys." Sarah picked up her coffee again. "You can't control everything, Miles. You can build good systems and trust good people and hope it's enough. Sometimes it has to be enough." Before Miles could respond, Evelyn walked in looking like she'd been up for hours, which, knowing her, she probably had been. "The conference call with the network chapters starts in 30 minutes, she said without preamble. "Margaret's setting up the video feeds now. James has the grant allocation spreadsheets ready. Sarah, I need you to walk through the medical verification protocols. Miles," she paused, looking at him, "I need you to tell them why this matters. Not the statistics or the outcomes, the why." "I'm not good at speeches." "You're excellent at speeches. You just don't like giving them." Evelyn's expression softened slightly. "These people are about to take on something difficult and emotionally exhausting. They need to understand what they're fighting for. You can give them that." Miles wanted to argue, but she was already walking out, phone to her ear, handling 3 crises at once, the way she did every morning. He looked at Sarah, who just shrugged. "She's not wrong. You have a gift for making people understand what this feels like. Use it." The conference call connected representatives from 12 organizations in 8 states. Miles watched their faces appear on the screen. Directors of small nonprofits, hospital administrators, community organizers, people who'd seen the press coverage and decided they wanted to build something similar in their own cities. They looked eager and nervous and slightly overwhelmed, which Miles understood completely. Evelyn opened the meeting with her usual efficiency, walking through the structure of the network, the funding model, the support resources they'd be providing. Margaret covered the financial details. James explained the grant processing system they'd developed. Sarah went through medical verification protocols. And then Evelyn looked at Miles and said, "I'd like to turn it over to Miles Carter, our Director of Family Services, to talk about the human side of what we do." Miles unmuted his microphone and tried to ignore the fact that dozens of people were now looking at him expectantly. "I'm not going to tell you this is easy," he began. "It's not. You're going to talk to parents who are breaking apart in real time. You're going to hear stories that will keep you up at night. You're going to feel the weight of knowing that your decision, approve or deny, fast or slow, might be the difference between a child living or dying." He saw some of them shift uncomfortably, but he kept going. 2 years ago, I was one of those parents. My son needed emergency heart surgery, $300,000. I had nothing. I was sitting in a hospital waiting room trying to figure out how to say goodbye to a 6-year-old who still believed I could fix anything. And then someone I never met decided my son's life mattered more than the money. He paid for the surgery, saved Noah's life, and changed everything. Miles glanced at the watch on his wrist, the same watch he wore every single day. That gift didn't just save my son. It saved me. It gave me back a future I thought was gone. And it taught me something I'll never forget. When someone is drowning, you don't ask if they deserve to be saved. You don't form a committee to study the problem. You reach out your hand and you pull them to shore. That's what we do. That's what you're signing up to do. You become the hand that pulls people to shore when they're drowning in a system that values money over life. He looked at the faces on the screen. Some of them had tears in their eyes now. It's hard work. It's heartbreaking work. But it's also the most important work you'll ever do. Because every child you save, every family you help, that ripples out. That kid grows up. That parent gets to be a parent instead of planning a funeral. That family remembers that when they were drowning, someone cared enough to help. And maybe someday they pass it forward to someone else. Miles took a breath. So yeah, it's hard, but it's worth it. Every single time, it's worth it. The screen was quiet for a moment. Then a woman from the Seattle chapter unmuted herself. "Mr. Carter, my daughter died 3 years ago because we couldn't afford her treatment. I've spent every day since then wishing someone had existed to help us. That's why I'm here. That's why I want to build this. Because no other parent should have to bury their child because of money." One by one, others shared their stories. A man whose nephew had been saved by a charity he wanted to replicate. A hospital administrator who was tired of watching families make impossible choices. A community organizer who'd seen too many kids die for preventable reasons. By the end of the call, Miles felt emotionally wrung out, but also strangely hopeful. These people got it. They understood what they were building and why it mattered. They weren't in it for recognition or tax benefits or good PR. They were in it because they'd seen the broken places in the system and decided to fix them. After the call ended, Evelyn shut down the video feed and looked at Miles. That was perfect. It was just the truth. Sometimes that's the most perfect thing you can offer. She stood up and stretched, rolling her shoulders like she was trying to work out tension that had been building for months. "We did it, Miles. We actually built something that's going to outlive us. Richard built it. We're just finishing what he started." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then walked to the window. Snow was falling heavier now, covering the city in white. "I used to resent him, for keeping secrets, for helping you instead of fixing us, for dying before we could have the conversation we should have had years earlier." She turned to look at Miles. "But I think I understand now. He wasn't choosing you over me. He was choosing action over paralysis. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped them. Simple as that. And maybe if we'd been better at that, at just helping each other without overthinking it, we would have had a different ending. You can't know that." "No, but I can learn from it." Evelyn managed a small smile. "I'm better now than I was a year ago. Better at being present. Better at caring about things that matter. Better at being part of something bigger than myself. That's because of you and Noah. Because you let me into your lives even though you had every reason not to trust me."
Miles thought about that first day in the cemetery, the suspicion in her eyes, the fury when she saw the watch, how far they'd come from that moment. "You want to know what I think?" Miles said. "I think Richard would be proud of you, not because you're running his foundation or helping families or any of that, but because you let yourself break open and rebuild into something more real."
That takes more courage than writing checks. Evelyn's eyes got bright, but she blinked the tears back. "Noah told me last night that I'm not sad anymore, that I smile more now." "Do you?" "Yeah, I do." She walked back to her desk and picked up a folder. "I have something for you. I've been waiting for the right time, and I think today is it." She handed him the folder. Inside was a legal document, dense with language Miles didn't fully understand, but one phrase stood out clearly: irrevocable trust for Noah Carter, beneficiary. What is this? Richard's estate was substantial. After funding the foundation and setting aside reserves, there's still a significant amount left. I've been trying to figure out what to do with it, and I finally realized the answer was obvious. Evelyn pointed to the document. "This trust will pay for Noah's education. All of it. Undergraduate, graduate, medical school if he wants it. Whatever path he chooses, he won't have to worry about money. He'll get to follow his dreams instead of being limited by what you can afford." Miles felt like someone had punched all the air out of his lungs. "Evelyn, I can't accept this." "You're not accepting it. Noah is, and it's already done. The trust is established. The funds are transferred. You can't give it back." "This is too much." "It's not enough. Richard saved Noah's life. This just gives him a future worthy of that gift." Evelyn's voice was firm. "You've given me purpose, Miles. You've given me a family. You've given me a reason to use Richard's legacy for something that matters. Let me give Noah something too. Let me make sure that the boy my husband saved gets every opportunity to become whoever he's meant to be." Miles looked down at the document, at the numbers that represented a future he'd never let himself imagine for his son. College. Graduate school. Choices made based on passion instead of practicality. "He's going to do something important," Miles said quietly. "I don't know what yet, but he's going to make a difference. I can feel it. I know he will. Because he has you as a father, and because Richard gave him the chance." That evening, Miles drove to the cemetery alone. It was still snowing, and the roads were slick, but he needed to make this trip. He needed to stand at Richard's grave and say what he'd been carrying for a year. The cemetery was empty and silent. His footsteps crunched in the fresh snow as he made his way to Section D, Grave 47. Someone, probably Evelyn, had been there recently. Fresh flowers sat at the base of the headstone, not yet covered by snow. Miles knelt in the same spot where he'd been kneeling a year ago, when a stranger's voice had cut through the rain and changed everything. "Hi," he said quietly. "I know it's been a while. I've been busy, we've been busy, building what you started." The wind picked up, swirling snow around him. "Your wife is amazing, in case you didn't know." "I mean, you probably did, but she's stronger than she thinks she is. She's helping hundreds of families now. Soon it'll be thousands, and she's good at it. Not just the business part, the human part. She remembers their names. She cries when she hears their stories. She's become the person I think you always hoped she could be." Miles touched the watch on his wrist. "Noah's doing great too. He asks about you sometimes, about the man who saved him. I show him your picture and tell him you were someone who saw people who needed help and decided to care. He understands that. He's trying to be like that too. Last week he used his allowance to buy food for a homeless man outside our grocery store. He said it's what Mr. Pierce would do." A lump formed in Miles's throat. "I wanted you to know that we're finishing what you started. The foundation is everything you dreamed it would be. But it's also more than that. It's become a movement, a way of thinking about how we care for each other. You planted a seed, Richard. And it's growing into something beautiful." Miles stood up slowly, brushing snow off his knees. "I'm going to keep coming here, twice a year, like always, bringing flowers, saying thank you. Because that debt doesn't expire just because we've built something good. You saved my son. You saved me. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that gift keeps spreading to other families who need it." He placed his hand on the headstone, cold marble under his palm. Rest well, Richard. Your work is in good hands. As Miles walked back to his car, his phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Dinner at the house? Noah wants to show you his latest drawing. Miles smiled and typed back, be there in 20 minutes. He drove through the snowy streets thinking about families and legacies, and how sometimes the most important things we do are the things we never get credit for. Richard Pierce had saved one stranger's child and set in motion a chain of events that would save hundreds more. He died before seeing any of it come to fruition. But his impact was everywhere, in every child who got treatment, in every family who got hope, in every life that got a second chance. When Miles arrived at the estate, he could see lights on in both the main house and the guest wing. Home. This place had become home in a way his old apartment never was. Not because it was bigger or nicer, but because it was filled with people who cared about each other. Noah met him at the door, practically vibrating with excitement. Daddy, look what I made! He held up a drawing that was more ambitious than his usual work. It showed the foundation office with tiny detailed figures inside. Miles at his desk, Sarah on the phone, Evelyn at the whiteboard. And outside the building, dozens of smaller figures holding hands, connected by lines that spread across the page like a web. These are all the families we helped, Noah explained. See, they're connected, because when you help one person, it spreads to other people, like ripples in a pond. Miles felt his chest tighten. His 6-year-old son understood what they were building better than most adults. It's perfect, buddy. Absolutely perfect. Evelyn appeared from the kitchen, also looking at the drawing. He worked on it all afternoon, very seriously, wouldn't let me see it until it was finished. Because it had to be right, Noah said solemnly. It's for Mr. Pierce, for his grave, so he knows what we're doing. Miles and Evelyn exchanged a look over Noah's head. I think he'd love it, Miles said quietly. I think he'd be really proud. They ate dinner together in the main house, a meal Evelyn had cooked mostly by herself with only minimal help from Miles. The pasta was slightly overcooked and the sauce was a little too salty, but it was real and imperfect and exactly what they needed. After Noah went to bed, Miles and Evelyn sat in the living room nursing glasses of wine and watching snow fall outside the windows. Margaret told me something interesting today, Evelyn said. Amanda Peterson, the mother whose daughter had the heart surgery, she's enrolled in social work school. She wants to do what you do, work with families in crisis. That's the 4th one this month. 5th, actually. Marcus Thompson's father is training to be a patient advocate. Evelyn swirled her wine. We're not just saving kids, Miles. We're creating a whole generation of people who understand that helping others is how you make meaning out of suffering. That's bigger than I ever imagined. Miles thought about all the families they'd helped, about how many of them had turned around and wanted to pass it forward, about how one act of secret kindness from a man in a hospital waiting room had grown into a movement that was changing lives across the country. Richard was right, Miles said quietly. In his journal, he wrote that he couldn't fix the ocean, but he could save the person drowning in front of him. And we're proving that if enough people save the person drowning in front of them, eventually you do fix the ocean, one rescue at a time. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm happy, Miles. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm actually happy. Not content, not comfortable. Happy. Me too. I never thought I'd have a family after Richard died. Never thought I'd find purpose again. But here we are. She looked at him. You and Noah, you're my family now. Not because of Richard. Not because of the foundation. Just because you are. Miles felt emotion rise in his throat. You're ours too. Noah draws you in every picture, calls you Miss Evelyn like you're some kind of fairy godmother, and He stopped, searching for words. I'm grateful. Every single day, I'm grateful you showed up at that grave angry and suspicious and determined to understand, because it brought you into our lives. I'm grateful you were there, that you were brave enough to go to a stranger's grave and say thank you, even though you had no idea if anyone would understand why it mattered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall, and Miles thought about how life could surprise you, how you could go from broken and desperate to whole and purposeful, how strangers could become family, How one person's secret act of kindness could become a legacy that outlived them. 6 months later, on a warm spring day, they gathered at the cemetery again. But this time, they weren't alone. 247 families had been invited, and nearly 100 had made the trip. They stood together in Section D, surrounding Grave 47, a sea of people who shared one thing in common. Richard Pierce had changed their lives. Miles stood near the headstone with Noah on one side and Evelyn on the other. The snow had long since melted, and flowers bloomed in the grass. Someone had placed a small plaque next to the grave, something Evelyn had commissioned but hadn't told anyone about until today. The plaque read, "Here lies a man who saw strangers and decided they mattered. His kindness saved lives. His legacy saves more every day." Evelyn stepped forward to speak, and the crowd quieted. "Most of you never met my husband. He helped your families anonymously through the foundation we built in his name. But I knew him for 15 years, and I want you to understand something about Richard Pierce." She paused, looking out at all the faces. "He wasn't perfect. Our marriage wasn't perfect. He struggled with the same doubts and fears we all do, but he had one quality that mattered more than anything else. When he saw someone suffering, he couldn't walk away. He couldn't convince himself it wasn't his problem. He had to help, even if it meant keeping secrets, even if it meant giving up things that mattered to him. He had to help." Evelyn's voice wavered, but she kept going. "The foundation that bears his name has now helped over 500 families. The network we've built will reach thousands more. But the real legacy isn't the numbers. It's the ripple effect. It's Amanda Peterson going to social work school so she can help other families. It's Marcus Thompson's father training to be a patient advocate. It's every person here who's decided that because someone helped them, they're going to help someone else." She looked at Miles. "Richard saved one man's son. That man, Miles Carter, helped me understand what my husband was trying to do. And together we built something that's changing how our society thinks about helping people in crisis. That's not just Richard's legacy. That's all of our legacies. Every single person standing here is part of this story." The crowd was silent except for the sound of people crying quietly. "So thank you," Evelyn continued. "Thank you for letting us help you. Thank you for being part of this movement. Thank you for proving that kindness spreads, that compassion matters, and that when we take care of each other, we build something worth leaving behind." She stepped back, and Miles stepped forward. He looked out at the crowd, at Maria Rodriguez with Emma, who was completely cancer-free now, at Marcus Thompson's parents with their son, who'd recovered fully from the accident, at Amanda Peterson with Sophie, whose repaired heart was beating strong and steady, at dozens of other families, each with their own story of crisis and rescue and gratitude. "My son is alive because Richard Pierce saw me breaking apart in a hospital waiting room and decided I mattered," Miles said. "I don't know what I did to deserve that gift. I don't know why he chose to help me instead of walking away, but I know what I'm going to do with it." He looked down at Noah, who was holding a bouquet of daisies, the same kind Miles had brought to this grave a year and a half ago. "I'm going to make sure his gift keeps spreading. I'm going to help every family I can reach. I'm going to build systems that make it easier for people to help each other. And I'm going to teach my son that when you see someone drowning, you don't ask questions. You reach out your hand and you pull them to shore." Noah stepped forward and placed the daisies at the base of the headstone. Then he did something Miles didn't expect. He pulled his latest drawing out of his pocket, the one showing all the families connected by lines, and placed it next to the flowers. "This is for you, Mr. Pierce," Noah said in his clear, serious voice. "Thank you for saving my daddy, and thank you for showing us how to save other people." The crowd erupted in applause, and Miles had to blink back tears. One by one, other families came forward. They placed flowers and letters and drawings and photographs at the grave. They shared their stories. They thanked a man they'd never met for setting in motion the events that had saved their children's lives. And through it all, Miles stood with Evelyn's hand in his, and Noah pressed against his side, watching a stranger's secret kindness become a community's shared purpose. When the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, a reporter who'd been covering the foundation approached Miles. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you one question?" "Sure." "What do you think Richard Pierce would say if he could see all this?" Miles thought about that, about the journals and the watch and the secret gift that had changed everything. About a man who died thinking his marriage was empty and his legacy uncertain. About how wrong he'd been. "I think he'd say it was worth it," Miles answered. "I think he'd say that every second mattered. And I think he'd tell us to keep going, to save the next person, and the next, and the next. Because that's how you fix the ocean, one rescue at a time." The reporter scribbled notes, thanked him, and walked away. Evelyn looked at Miles. Ready to go home? Home. Not the guest wing, not separate spaces, just home. The place where they'd all learned to be family. "Yeah," Miles said. "Let's go home." They walked back to the car together, Miles, Evelyn, and Noah. And as they drove through the city, Miles looked at the watch on his wrist. The same watch Richard Pierce had sent him 2 years ago. The watch that said every second matters. He thought about all the seconds that had led them here. The second Richard decided to pay for a stranger's surgery. The second Miles knelt at a grave to say thank you. The second Evelyn found the courage to read her husband's journals. The second Noah offered his teddy bear to a grieving widow. The second they all decided that building something good was better than carrying something broken. Every single second had mattered. Every single choice had rippled outward. Every single act of kindness had multiplied. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and do it again. They'd answer the phone when desperate parents called. They'd approve grants for children who needed help. They'd train new chapters of the network. They'd build systems that made caring for each other the default instead of the exception. They'd honor Richard Pierce by finishing what he started. They'd honor each other by showing up, being present, and choosing to care. And they'd honor every family they helped by making sure the gift kept spreading, kept growing, kept changing lives long after they were gone. Because in the end, that's what legacy really meant. Not buildings or plaques or names on foundations, but the ripples you create, the lives you change, the kindness you pass forward. Richard Pierce had created ripples that would spread for generations, and Miles Carter, Evelyn Pierce, and a 6-year-old boy with a teddy bear named Mr. Buttons were going to make sure those ripples never stopped. As they pulled through the gates of the estate, Noah spoke up from the back seat. "Daddy?" "Yeah, buddy?" "When I grow up, I want to help families like we do. I want to make sure kids don't have to be scared." Miles looked at him in the rearview mirror, this beautiful, wise, impossibly kind child who'd been given a second chance at life and wanted to spend it helping others. "Then that's exactly what you'll do," Miles said, "and I'll help you every step of the way." Evelyn reached over and squeezed Miles's hand. "We both will." They walked into the house together and Noah ran ahead to show them something he'd been working on. Another drawing, more elaborate than the last, showing not just the families they'd helped, but the families those families would help, spreading out like branches on a tree that grew toward the sky. Miles looked at that drawing and saw the future. Not perfect, not without challenges, but good, worth fighting for, worth building. That night, after Noah was asleep and Evelyn had gone back to the main house, Miles stood in the garden under the stars. He touched the watch on his wrist and thought about the man who'd worn it before him, the man who'd sat in the same garden writing in journals about wanting to matter, the man who'd died not knowing that he'd created something beautiful and lasting and true. "We did it, Richard," Miles whispered to the night. "We finished what you started, and we're going to keep going for as long as it takes, for every family that needs us, for every child who deserves a chance." The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. Someone's child, someone's second chance, someone's proof that kindness spreads. Miles smiled and walked back inside, ready for tomorrow, ready for the next call, ready for the next family, ready to keep pulling people to shore one rescue at a time, because every second mattered, and they were going to make every single one count.